Picture this: you command only 10,000 Roman soldiers. In front of you, an army of more than 250,000 Armenians completely fills the horizon. That's a ratio of 25 enemies to every one of your soldiers. Any sensible commander would retreat immediately. But Lucullus was no ordinary commander. In 69 BC, on the plains near the Armenian capital of Tigranocerta, Lucius Licinius Lucullus was about to pull off one of the most impressive military feats in ancient history. His victory was the result of a brilliant strategy that exploited every weakness in the enemy while maximizing every Roman advantage. And in this video, we're going to see exactly how Lucullus managed to win a battle that seemed absolutely impossible. To understand the importance of this battle, you have to look at the context that led Rome and Armenia to clash directly. In the 70s BC, the Near East was a region with an extremely volatile political landscape. Mithridates VI, king of Pontus, had challenged Rome for many years in a series of wars known as the Mithridatic Wars. When Lucullus took command of the Roman forces in the region, Mithridates had been defeated on several occasions, but kept slipping away. His survival strategy depended on powerful alliances. The most important of those alliances was with Tigranes II, king of Armenia, who had built one of the largest empires in the east. Tigranes was not just an ally of Mithridates. The two kings were bound by blood. Tigranes had married Mithridates' daughter decades earlier. When the king of Pontus sought refuge in Armenia, Tigranes welcomed him without hesitation. That decision put Armenia on a direct collision course with Rome. Tigranes' Armenian empire stretched from Syria to the Caucasus. He had conquered significant parts of what we now know as Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. His capital, Tigranocerta, was a newly built city, and Tigranes had forcibly populated it, transferring entire populations from conquered cities to the new capital. When Lucullus marched toward Armenia in 69 BC, many considered his decision risky. Rome had other urgent problems. Its military resources were stretched thin across multiple fronts. Some senators in Rome questioned whether it was worth pursuing Mithridates into the mountains of Armenia. But Lucullus grasped something fundamental. As long as Mithridates had a refuge, he would remain a threat to Rome. The decision to besiege Tigranocerta was strategic for several reasons. First, attacking Tigranes' new capital was a direct blow to his prestige. In addition, the city held enormous riches from Armenia's conquests. Finally, by threatening Tigranocerta, Lucullus would force Tigranes to abandon his positions in the mountains and face him in open battle. When Lucullus began the siege of Tigranocerta, his forces totaled approximately 10,000 Roman soldiers, bolstered by some auxiliary troops. That number seems solid, but it's important to remember he was in enemy territory, thousands of kilometers from Rome, with no guarantee of reinforcements. The siege of a fortified city always posed major challenges for the Romans. Unlike a battle in open field, where Roman tactics usually dominated, a siege required more time and resources, and left the army vulnerable to external attacks. Lucullus knew that by besieging Tigranocerta, he would be splitting his forces across two fronts. One part would be responsible for the siege, while the other would need to be ready to face any army coming to relieve the city. When messengers informed Tigranes about the siege of his capital, his initial reaction was contempt. Historical sources say he remarked that the number of Romans was too large to be an embassy, but too small to be an army. That arrogance wasn't entirely unfounded. Tigranes had spent decades building a vast military empire and commanded enormous human resources. The army Tigranes mobilized to relieve his capital was impressive in sheer scale. Ancient estimates speak of numbers between 250,000 and 300,000 fighters. Although ancient chroniclers often exaggerated figures, modern military analysis indicates that Tigranes truly commanded forces at least 20 times larger than Lucullus's. This army included the famous Armenian heavy cavalry, the cataphracts, among the best of the ancient world, as well as troops drawn from many conquered peoples. When the Armenian troops came into view of Tigranocerta, the Roman soldiers felt a wave of dread. Some officers suggested that Lucullus lift the siege and retreat to safer positions. After all, facing an army 25 times larger seemed like a suicide mission, even by Roman standards of discipline and courage. However, Lucullus noticed something his officers had not immediately seen. Tigranes' enormous army had serious vulnerabilities. First, it was made up of contingents from many different peoples, each with its own languages, tactics, and unstable loyalties. Many of those soldiers had been forcibly recruited from recently conquered territories. Moreover, an army of that size faced enormous logistical challenges. Coordinating, feeding, and moving hundreds of thousands of men required an organization that was rare in the ancient world. Finally, Tigranes' overconfidence in his numerical superiority was a weakness Lucullus knew how to exploit. Lucullus called a council of war with his officers, and in that decisive meeting he shared his analysis of the situation. He argued that despite its impressive size, the Armenian army was, in fact, vulnerable. The discipline that kept the Roman legions steady under pressure simply did not exist in that mass of warriors from different backgrounds. In addition, Lucullus identified a crucial tactical mistake made by Tigranes. With so many soldiers concentrated in a relatively small area, the Armenians would not be able to maneuver effectively or respond quickly to Roman maneuvers, so what looked like a gigantic force became, ironically, a tactical limitation. The Roman commander also realized that time was on his side in ways that were not immediately obvious. The longer the Armenian army remained mobilized, the greater its logistical difficulties would become. Forcibly recruited soldiers would begin to desert, and tensions between the different ethnic groups would increase. The initial confidence in a quick victory would give way to frustration and doubt. Lucullus's strategy for winning this difficult battle was based on several ideas working together. First, he decided to keep part of his army besieging the city. This surprised many of his officers, who thought he should use all his troops in the battle. But Lucullus realized that maintaining the siege brought several benefits. It prevented the city's soldiers from attacking his troops from behind during the fight. Finally, it forced Tigranes to worry both about saving the city and about facing the Romans in open battle. The second part of Lucullus's plan was to conduct thorough reconnaissance. He sent highly experienced soldiers to watch the Armenian camp from multiple angles. These observers brought back important information about how the enemy army was organized, where the troops of each people were positioned, where the supply dumps were, and which routes were used to bring in more supplies. With that information, Lucullus knew exactly where to strike. He realized that the Armenian heavy cavalry, though very powerful, was placed where the terrain made it difficult for them to move quickly, limiting how effective they could be. The third part of Lucullus's plan was to prepare his soldiers' minds and tactics. He assembled his troops and explained the situation in detail. Lucullus was frank about the challenges, but he presented the huge numerical disparity in a way the soldiers could understand and accept. He reminded them of past victories in which Roman organization had defeated larger armies. Then he emphasized that the quality of each Roman soldier was worth many poorly trained enemies. Finally, he promised that if they followed his plan to the letter, they would return home alive and rich with the riches of the enemy empire. Lucullus chose to strike at the exact moment when the Armenian army was at its most vulnerable. After days of marching and a recent arrival at the battlefield, Tigranes' troops were still organizing and setting up their camp. Many soldiers had removed their armor. Contingents from different regions were still settling into their positions. Command and control, always difficult in armies this large, were at their most chaotic. Lucullus arranged his forces in a formation that would maximize the initial impact. He would concentrate his best troops, veterans of earlier campaigns against Mithridates, in a focused assault formation. Instead of stretching his lines to cover the vast front of the Armenian army, he created a deep penetration force to be launched against a specific point in the enemy lines. This formation, called a wedge, had been used by Roman commanders with mixed results in similar situations, but rarely under conditions so unfavorable. At the same time, Lucullus positioned his cavalry in an unconventional way. Instead of using cavalry on the army's flanks, as was typical, he ordered it to strike the Armenian supplies and camps as soon as the fighting began. This shows he understood the enemy's weak point was the rear, logistics and supplies, rather than the front battle line. The Roman leader also defined clearly what each unit was supposed to do and what its objectives were. Instead of a scattered command structure, common in many ancient armies, Lucullus created a system in which every officer knew exactly his task at each moment of the battle. That precise organization would be crucial once the fighting began. When Lucullus ordered the attack, he did it so quickly and unexpectedly that he caught the Armenians completely off guard. He deliberately chose the moment to cause maximum confusion. Tigranocerta's troops were still getting into place when they saw the Roman soldiers advancing in tight formation. The Roman formation was intimidating even to those with war experience. The Roman soldiers advanced in silence and with strict discipline, using their shields like a wall and their spears pointed forward at the same angle. The thunder of thousands of sandals striking the ground at the same time seemed to make the earth tremble. That organized assault was the opposite of the growing disorder on the Armenian side. The first to grasp the seriousness of the situation were the Armenian soldiers closest to the Roman attack. They began shouting warnings and trying to arm themselves quickly. But the speed and precision of the Roman assault made those attempts almost useless. When Lucullus's soldiers hit the Armenian lines, the result was horrific. The Armenian heavy cavalry, which was supposed to be King Tigranocerta's secret weapon, was pinned in place. The ground where they were positioned was not suitable for charging. When they tried to shift position, they ran into their own infantry blocking the way. The Armenian army was too large. What looked good from afar had now become a trap. Soldiers trampled one another as they tried to defend themselves. People from different regions couldn't communicate because of language barriers. Meanwhile, the Romans sliced through. They fought so well because they had trained for years. They knew exactly what to do together. They pushed ahead little by little, killing or wounding anyone in their path, stepping over bodies to keep moving. Lucullus's idea of striking a weak point began to work. As the Romans advanced, it terrified the entire Armenian army. Soldiers farther away watched their comrades being killed without being able to help. The belief that Tigranocerta couldn't lose vanished quickly. At the same time, the Roman cavalry carried out the second part of Lucullus's plan. They rode around the main fight and attacked the Armenian camp. The guards protecting the food and supplies, already nervous from the sounds of battle, were quickly overwhelmed. The Romans began setting the tents on fire. For the Armenian soldiers, already in panic, seeing the camp burning was the final blow. Soldiers who had been forced to fight and felt little loyalty to Tigranocerta began to flee in large numbers. At first, it was a few. Then entire groups ran. Finally, the retreat turned into an uncontrollable stampede. The Armenian heavy cavalry, trapped in the middle of the chaos, tried to withdraw in an orderly way. But the terrain and the crush of fleeing men made it impossible. Many horsemen were pulled down and killed by their own infantry, desperate to escape. Others were caught and killed by Roman cavalrymen who pursued the fleeing troops relentlessly. Tigranocerta tried several times to rally his men during the battle. With his guards nearby, he rode from one point to another, trying to steady the defensive line. But every time he managed to gather a group, a Roman breakthrough elsewhere caused everything to collapse again. In the end, seeing that the battle was completely lost, Tigranocerta fled the field with a handful of guards, abandoning not only his army, but also his capital. Lucullus's great victory at Tigranocerta surprised even the Romans themselves. When the news reached Rome, many senators thought it was a lie. Such a massive victory against such odds seemed impossible. But as the details came in, it became clear that Lucullus had truly won. The Armenians suffered enormous losses. It is estimated that thousands of soldiers died in the battle or during the rout. Thousands were captured and sold as slaves. The royal treasury Tigranocerta left behind fell into Roman hands. filling Rome's coffers and the soldiers' pockets. But the most important consequences were political. First, the empire Tigranes had built with such effort began to crumble immediately. The peoples he had forced to fight saw the defeat as a chance to free themselves, and several revolts broke out at once. The defeat reshaped politics across the Near East. Kingdoms that had considered joining Tigranes and Mithridates against Rome changed their minds quickly. The Parthian Empire, courted by both sides, decided it was better to remain neutral. Small states in Syria and Anatolia, which had feared Armenian power, now declared full support for Rome. For Mithridates, who had been taking refuge at the Armenian court, the defeat was a devastating blow. He had staked his life on Tigranes' ability to stop Rome. Now he was fleeing yet again, without reliable allies or money. His ability to threaten Rome had effectively ended, although he would still fight for a few more years before he died. Finally, the Battle of Tigranocerta is an example of how intelligence and military tactics can defeat a much larger army. So, if you enjoyed learning more about this surprising victory by the Roman army, leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more incredible historical battles that changed the world.